Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. I'm your host, Corey Nathan. It's an honor to be a part of the Democracy Group and network of podcasts that examines what's broken in our democracy and how we can work together to fix it. And I'm just going to jump right to it. Everything that you do, the subscriptions and the reviews, everything helps so that we could continue having great conversations like the one we're having today with Congressman Ritchie Torres. Now, I usually don't do this, but the first line of our guest's bio really says it all. Representative Ritchie Torres is a fighter from the Bronx who has spent his entire life working for the community he calls home. A quick bio here. In 2013, Ritchie Torres went on to become New York City's youngest elected official, and during a 7-year tenure on the city council, passed over 40 pieces of legislation, including legislation protecting the city's affordable housing stock and tackling the city's opioid epidemic. He also led investigations into the heating outages and lead poisoning at New York City Housing Authority, the taxi medallion scandal, and Kushner Companies, among others. Ritchie still lives in the Bronx and represents New York's 15th in the U.S. Congress. Congressman Torres, this is such an honor. Thank you for joining me. And as they say in the Bronx, how you doing?
Never a dull moment.
Never a dull moment. Yeah.
Bronx or in D.C.?
Yeah, I heard last night was a big vote that the Republicans took. We're recording this. What is today, the 25th or the 26th? It's a Wednesday. Republicans took a vote in the House, part of on the budget bill, part of which included the largest cut to Medicaid. I was wondering, as a Democrat in the House, how can someone effectively represent their constituents after a vote like that?
Well, the House Republican budget resolution is a tragedy for working people. It's a frontal assault on the social safety net. The budget resolution will cut Medicaid by up to $880 billion. And there's no congressional district in America more dependent on Medicaid than mine. It will cut education by up to $330 billion. And it will cut food assistance, SNAP, by up to $230 billion. So the Republican budget is essentially a regressive distribution of wealth from working people to the top 1%. It is defunding healthcare and food in order to finance a $1.1 trillion tax cut for the top 1%. I feel like it represents a fundamental misplacement of priorities. It's a betrayal of working people. And it's a frontal assault on the social safety net. And districts like mine are going to be hit the hardest.
Now, for you, I understand this isn't just theoretical. This is part of your life story. It's something, it hits close to home, literally and figuratively, in that you've been working on this in your 7 years in the city council, and now going into, I think this is your third term now in the House. I'd like to take a step back for a second, and if you would, I'd love for you to tell me a little bit more about your greatest hero.
Well, my greatest hero is my mother. I am the product of a single mother who raised three of us on minimum wage, which in the 1990s was $4.25 an hour. Born and raised in the Bronx, spent most of my life in poverty. And when I won my congressional primary in June of 2020, when I knew that I was on a trajectory to become a member of Congress, I publicly said that before I'm a congressman or a councilman, I'm first and foremost the son of my mother, Deborah Boslet. Like, I would not be here were it not for my mother. And what I love most about representing the Bronx is that it's full of single mothers like mine who have struggled and sacrificed and suffered so that their children or grandchildren can have a fighting chance at the American dream. And so I'm just deeply grateful to the unsung heroism of powerful mothers like mine. My mother raised my brother and me and my sister in public housing. New York City has the largest concentration of public housing in North America. And it's been so chronically underfunded by the federal government that it has a capital need of $80 billion and counting.
Mm.
And so I grew up in conditions of mold and mildew, leaks and lead without really reliable heat and hot water in the winter or reliable air conditioning in the summer. And my life is something of a metaphor because I actually grew up right across the street from Trump Golf Course. And I kid you not, as the golf course was undergoing construction, it unleashed a skunk infestation. So I've been smelling the stench of Donald Trump long before he entered American politics. But as the conditions in my home were getting worse every day, the city government had decided to invest $100 million in capital funding to construct a new golf course in honor of Donald Trump. And I remember asking myself at the time, what does it say about our society that we're willing to put more money into a golf course than into the homes of poor people of color in public housing? And so that experience of housing inequality and the shadow of Trump Golf Course had a profound impact on me. I got my start in politics as a housing organizer. And then eventually at age 24, I took the leap of faith and ran for public office. I had no deep pockets, I had no ties to the party machine. But I just spent a whole year doing nothing but knocking on doors. I went into people's homes. I heard their stories. And I won my first campaign on the strength of door-to-door, face-to-face campaigning. Became the first openly LGBTQ elected official from the Bronx. What's unusual about my life is that 7 years before then, I was at the lowest point of my life. I had dropped out of college. I found myself struggling with depression. I even thought of taking my own life because I felt as if the world around me had collapsed. I underwent hospitalization. And, I never thought in my wildest dreams that with the support of my greatest hero, my mother, I would have the ability to rebuild my life and a few years later become the youngest elected official in America's largest city, and then eventually become a member of the United States Congress. So even in your moment of greatest darkness and despair, never lose hope. There's no telling how life will unfold.
So I really appreciate that backstory. I'm getting chills, frankly, just thinking about it because it it's again, it's not theoretical. These are very meat and potatoes issues. You talk about mold in your buildings, which I know led to your asthma as a kid. These are very real, practical issues that you've been fighting for. One of my questions, another remarkable trait that you've displayed is a certain moral clarity. That just as you fight for what a lot of folks would say are progressive economic issues, you've also eschewed some of the more identitarian issues that you think draw away from what really makes a difference in people's lives, like your own life story. How did you develop the kind of moral clarity that you've exhibited, especially since you've been on the national stage?
Whatever virtues I possess are ultimately attributable to my mother who raised me. But I feel like as a public servant, we're here to do the right thing. DC is so hyper-partisan and so hyper-polarized that most elected officials think and act tribally. Like I value the ability to think and act independently. I value the ability to be my own person. For me, the freedom of thought is the ultimate expression of one's liberty and individuality and diversity. And so I'm fiercely protective of my independence, not only as a public servant, but as a person. And it's my independence that enables me to speak about issues with moral clarity and moral courage and moral common sense. Like I refuse to live in fear of the extremes. I insist on doing what I think is right and standing up for what I believe in, even if it means standing alone. I've often said that the greatest threat to liberal democracy does not come from the far left or from the far right, but it comes from the cowardice and complacency of a center that lives in fear of the extremes. During the French Revolution, the weapon of choice was the guillotine.
Hmm.
During our present revolution, the weapon of choice seems to be social media. And, there are many in elected office who live in fear of being guillotined at the hands of the Twitter mob.
Right.
The Achilles heel of most elected officials is a pathological need to be loved by everyone.
Hmm.
And I thank God every day that I have no need to be loved by anyone. And when you give up the need to be loved, like that is the beginning of leadership, the beginning of liberation. I'm willing to stand up for what I believe in, even if it means standing alone, even if it means facing ostracism, even in my own ideological backyard.
So you mentioned earlier about your fighting mental health, that out of your grappling with depression, it shortly thereafter, you is when you decided to run for city council from out of the depths, that you were spurred into a life of public service. I'm curious about the tools that you've developed specifically to continue to persist through and pursue mental health. I'm also curious to what degree the attacks, listen, the MAGA crowd, I guess that's to be expected. I know for me, I've also shared with our audience here that I was diagnosed a couple of years ago as bipolar, but I've grappled with mental health issues my whole life. And I would say that the folks who are maybe closer to me, when I say something that strikes a nerve with folks who are closer to me, those are the times when my proclivities toward the depressive parts of the cycle are most exacerbated. So I'm curious if that's the case for you. And again, the first part of the question being, what are some of those arrows in your or tools in your mental health toolbox?
Well, I've been there. There are few in elected office who have been as radically open and transparent about one's struggles with mental illness as I've been. I feel a profound sense of obligation to share my story in the hopes of breaking the shame and stigma and silence that often surrounds the subject of mental health. Every morning I take an antidepressant, Wellbutrin XL, 150 milligrams, and I feel no shame in admitting it because I feel like mental illness is nothing of which to be ashamed. And the medication that I take enables me to be the best version of myself, to be a productive public servant. So I'm living proof that mental health care can have a transformative impact in lifting up your life and enabling you to perform at a high standard in one of the most demanding professions, which is politics. The greatest challenge for me is I'm an introvert in a profession meant for extroverts. And as an introvert, I need space and time to replenish myself. I need time for contemplation, and it can be hard to come by, given the demands of congressional life. Not only am I constantly traveling between DC and New York, but I'm traveling throughout the country, often for fundraising. I'm traveling throughout the world, often for diplomatic delegations. The life of a congressman, especially if you put your heart and soul into it, can be extraordinarily demanding, and it requires you to juggle multiple commitments, multiple roles at once.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned part of your job as a congressman is traveling around the world, at times, traveling around the country, traveling the world. But this isn't new to your life just since you've entered Congress. I was listening to another interview that you did, and you shared that it's now almost exactly 10 years ago that was your first trip to Israel. So I was hoping that you could share a little bit more about that experience, um, and what inspired you, I guess, from that first trip, because you've been back, to become a Zionist.
So I don't know if I can add to the mental health question
I'm
because
sorry,
you
yeah,
asked about the impact.
please.
Um, you know, but it's connected to the question you just asked. There's no topic on which I face more hate, harassment, and death threats than on the issue of Israel. I've had activists ambush me outside my home,
Mm,
outside my office, here in the Capitol. They were activists who said to my mother, "You're a genocide mother, and you should have aborted your son." I've been the target of unrelenting vitriol and vandalism and harassment and intimidation. And so there are moments when politics takes a toll on you because no one wants to be hated. No one wants to be a polarizing figure. Um, but I remind myself of a quote from Hyman Roth of Godfather 2, who said, "This is the life we've chosen." Uh, and so, I chose politics. I knew what I was signing up for. It might be a little more intense than I thought, but I try to do my best to move forward. To your point about traveling to Israel, I said publicly recently that February of 2025 marks my 10-year anniversary as a Zionist. I've been traveling to Israel for about a decade. When I first entered elected politics in 2014, I had no real knowledge of Israel or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I had grown up in a community that was almost exclusively Latino and African American. So I had next to no engagement with the Jewish community, no knowledge of Judaism or Zionism or Israel. And when I entered the city council, I was invited by the Jewish Community Relations Council to go on a delegation for Israel to Israel. It was the first time I ever had an opportunity to travel abroad. And when you experience both the majesty and the complexity of Israel firsthand, when you go to the Old City or Yad Vashem or the Masada or the Gaza envelope, these are powerfully formative and transformative experiences. I remember a conversation I had with the local mayor of Sderot, who said to me that the majority of his children struggle with post-traumatic stress because children like his live under the threat of relentless rocket fire.
mm,
And I remember seeing bus stops doubling as bomb shelters. And I thought to myself, imagine the sheer trauma of an Israeli child seeking refuge in a bomb shelter while rockets are being fired and sirens are going off and adults are panicking. And all of this is happening not in wartime, but in peacetime. I come from a rough place, the Bronx, where people, my neighbors and family, live in fear of bullets, guns, but no one anywhere in the United States lives in fear of rockets, right? None of us as Americans fear that Mexico and Canada are going to fire rockets into American homes and communities. And so I came to realize early on that Israel faces a level of insecurity and volatility that has no real analog in the American experience. And so ever since then, I've been traveling to Israel for about 10 years, and I feel profound empathy, not only for the plight of the Jewish people, but for the unique security situation confronting the Jewish state.
Well, as someone who has family in Israel, I grew up very observantly Jewish, and I stay in touch now with family there, especially since October 7th. The kids, there are nine of them. My contemporaries, um, uh, there were three, a brother and two sisters who are about my age, and between the three of them, there's nine grandkids, or the next generation. They were all called up to the IDF after October 7th. So, as someone with family in Israel, you are mishpacha, mishpacha, as they say in Hebrew, or mishpacha in Yiddish. So we're grateful for the stand that you've taken, and I wasn't aware of the extent to which you've had to suffer attacks. I assumed that you did, but I'm grateful that you shared some of the specifics there. Um, I,
To the depth of anti-Semitism in our society, because there is no issue that provokes the kind of derangement and
mm,
hysteria than the issue of Israel. It's quite something.
yeah, yeah. I was curious how you started to make a discernment between the issues that you continue to fight for. Again, the practical day-to-day economic issues that you've been working towards since your time as a kid, I'm assuming, but certainly since your time in New York City's the city council, and certainly now in Congress. How do you discern and stay focused on those issues versus the issues that, as you would say, the TikTok Twitter crowd would put so much pressure on you to pursue? Whether it's on an issue like this that to me is pretty clear, or some other issues like the insistence on using a term like Latinx or defund the police. It's like I don't know. It's like kitty, cat, whatever. You know what I'm talking about. It's come do this, and this is a nice distraction, and this is what all the cool kids are doing. Like, how do you make that discernment and stay focused on your task?
Look, I feel like we should focus on the issues that matter to everyday people. Like we in the Democratic Party should be laser focused on lowering cost, lowering crime rates, creating opportunity, making government work for working people, and ignore the fashionable nonsense.
Mm,
Ignore absurdities like Latinx and defund the police and defund ICE and all these hashtags on Twitter. Ignore the three-letter acronyms like ESG and DEI and CRT because all of it comes off as academic discourse. Like most people want to be safe and most people want an affordable cost of living, an affordable place of live to
mm,
live. And
yeah,
we should speak to the issues that matter to people in a language that is familiar to people.
yeah. Yeah, this whole time we've been talking for about 25 minutes, and we haven't even gotten to the Trump administration yet. Uh, what are your greatest concerns about Trump 2.0?
I'm concerned that Donald Trump is worse than he's ever been.
Mm.
Like we are only a month into his presidency and it feels like it's been a year. And Donald Trump's second presidency is much more aggressive and much more vindictive and much more dangerous and reckless than even his first. And I'm concerned that his second presidency could do lasting damage to liberal democracy in America. I mean, he is making claims of executive authority that are so sweeping that it undermines separation of powers and checks and balances. Like he claims to have the authority to defund whatever program he wishes, whenever he wishes, for whatever reason he wishes. He claims to have the authority to shut down whatever federal agency he wishes. He claims to have the authority to fire whomever he wishes, even if it means violating an act of Congress. And so Donald Trump represents a serious challenge to liberal democracy in America in the 21st century. And congressional Democrats are on the front lines of defending democracy from the extremes and excesses of Donald Trump, who's more vindictive than ever.
So, is there something that can be done? In Biden's first term, especially in his first 2 years, there were large pieces of legislation that were passed in a bipartisan fashion: CHIPS and Science Act, infrastructure, safer communities, avoiding the fiscal cliff a couple of times. Not to mention, getting support from Republicans to support Ukraine, to support another Democratic ally. But is there anything you believe can get done in a bipartisan fashion with this administration and this Congress?
Well, bipartisanship will happen, but not by preference, but by necessity. Republicans cannot fund the government without House Democrats. Republicans cannot raise the debt ceiling without House Democrats. And so even though we're in the minority, we have more leverage than people think, and we're going to use every ounce of leverage that we have to protect the social contract, to protect social safety net programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. We have no choice. But Donald Trump is poisoning the well, and he shows no interest in governing. I think of Donald Trump and Elon Musk as arsonists who are intent on burning everything down. just breaking everything. And I worry that the lasting damage to the governing capabilities of the United States could endure long after Trump and Elon Musk are gone.
Mm. Yeah, it's uncertain times that we're in. Um, I have a couple more questions and then we can wrap it up. I'm curious about your political future. I heard you own up to the possibility that you might even be running for governor of New York. What's going into your considerations for this possibility, and how unique is it to be considering a run like this with a sitting governor of the same party?
One of my constituents asked me, Congressman, are you planning to move up? And I said, yes, I hope to go to heaven. Can you put in a good word for me? But before I go to heaven, or wherever I go, I hope to ascend politically, but unclear what form that will take. But I am seriously considering a run for governor because I feel like it's time for a new generation of leadership. If you do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result, that's the definition of insanity. And so I feel like we in New York are at a crossroads. We can either double down on a broken political system, or we can usher in a new generation of leadership that's committed to disrupting the status quo and fixing what is broken in our politics. There are people like Kathy Hochul who are so embedded in the broken system that she's no longer aware of its brokenness. And so we need a new infusion of energy and leadership in states like New York.
Well, fixing what's broken, this is my last question. It's called the TP&R question. What do you think each of us can do to be able to share space with, have better conversations with, perhaps even nurture relationships with people across our differences, people who have different backgrounds and beliefs than we do, who get their news from different sources than we do? How can we do better at talking politics and religion without killing each other? Or is it even possible?
Not only should it be a possibility, it's a necessity for a pluralistic democracy like ours. The trouble is that politics has become religiosity without religion.
Hmm.
If you're on the extremes, whether you're on the far left or the far right, you think that you alone have the absolute truth, that your policy prescriptions are the only path to salvation. And anyone who disagrees with you is not merely wrong, but evil and should be burned at the stake for heresy. And that kind of fundamentalism, that kind of dogmatism is incompatible with the spirit of politics, which is about compromise and common ground. And so I feel strongly that we have to approach politics with intellectual humility, with a presumption of grace, and with a commitment to ensuring that all of us coexist and that our diversity of opinion is not a weakness but a strength. We should celebrate that we live in a country where we can have widely varied views but nonetheless coexist for our collective good. Um, so we should all renew our commitment to American pluralism.
Renew our commitment to American pluralism. That's a great way to end it. Congressman Torres, this was a real honor. Thank you so much for doing this.
Always a pleasure. Take care.
You too. And as always, if you dig what we're doing here, remember to follow this show, write that review, and now you can watch these conversations on YouTube and support us on Patreon. It's youtube.com/@politicsandreligion and patreon.com/politicsandreligion. Your support really does make a difference, so thank you for all of it. Now go talk some politics and religion with gentleness and respect, and have a great week.
You get me, feel it, you get me, get you, you get me.